I'm Jamie with Guitarist Magazine, and today I'm delighted to have Stuart Robson of Sunbear Pickups with me, and we're going to do a deep dive into some classic pickup designs, starting with the ubiquitous and revered PAF, and a lot has been said about this pickup, perhaps even too much, but we're going to say some more today.
Yeah, wrong person to have on for less of that, I think. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's briefly do a sort of overview of the history of the PAF, both from when it came in, but also how it kind of morphed and evolved through the time that it was made. So when was the PAF introduced?
So the first guitars that really saw them were the original PAF gold tops as you transition in early '57 to the gold top with a set of PAFs in it. And they started out with steel covers, which for a very short period of time, they didn't really work that well with the pickup, and they were a nightmare in terms of stamping, wear on the tooling, that kind of thing. You then have all the iterative changes that go on throughout the whole history of the PAF, but the '57 ones, they tend to be, they're wound on the original early winders, the KZ winders, Geo Stevens, and they produce a very particular type of coil shape. It's sometimes referred to as a center focused coil. It's to do with the traverse of the machine and how far it goes backwards and forwards as it's laying the wire on the coil. They all have a long internal lead wire that goes into the bobbin, so that disrupts the coil internally. That continues right the way through until we get to the patent number pickups and we switch wire types and all that kind of thing. But the core of the pickup basically is maple spacer, butyrate bobbins, 42 gauge plain enamel wire, long Alnico magnets of various grades, that's a discussion, and a long internal lead wire, braided hookup wire, and a nickel stamped cover. Carbon content in the parts varies throughout the time, from lower to higher carbon, and that's pretty inconsistent. Effectively, they're kind of a moving target all the way through their creation, and there isn't really, like most things with vintage instruments, there isn't really a cut-off point where we go, right, we're now done with the '57 style of PAF, we're now into the '58 style. There's minglings, and you can even argue, is there a '57 style, is there a '58 style? There's enough cross-pollination throughout it all up until we get to mid to late 1960, where it starts to change and morph into something different.
And for the uninitiated, when did the PAF turn into the patent number?
So the earliest patent number stickers are '61, but the actual pickup itself doesn't change. So we'll talk and hear this guitar a little bit. These pickups are 1962 patent numbers, but internally they are a mid-late 1960 PAF. Yeah. They are PAFs in every sense, with the exception of the sticker on the base plate. Yeah. And you see that in the SGs that you have in '61, '62, '63, some of the hollow body guitars as well, some of the ES guitars. You'll sometimes find a guitar from '63, '64, and one of them will have a PAF sticker on, and the other one will have a patent number sticker on. And sometimes there can be widely different specs. Sometimes we are into the change with one of the pickups, and one of the pickups we're not, So it's, again, like everything else, it's another moving target.
So let's have a little listen to these. So we've just talked about them. So
these are in my number one guitar for the last 10 or more years, a Nick Huber Orca, a very straightforward Orca really, without any bells and whistles, though an absolutely lovely guitar. And this is a 25-inch scale guitar, so it's slightly longer than the guitar you have over here, so that adds a certain amount of clarity, but this is quite a rich sounding guitar. So.
It's really interesting because that's on the bridge pickup, and one of the things I associate with PAFs, and yes, they do vary, so we'll throw that caveat in. But one of the things in the big picture I associate with PAFs is there's no treble that hurts your ear, and there's a certain sweetness.
We'll try that out later. but yes,
and so I'm immediately sort of drawn to that in your playing on these very late PAFs, well, effectively PAFs, even though they're patent numbers.
They're very reactive.
Yeah.
So if you want to really dig in on the high strings, you can make them pretty. We go to that telly on steroids idea. Yeah. You can make them pretty strident and pretty hard, and you'll hear that a little bit in that guitar in a second. But equally, you back off your pick attack just a little bit and they'll bloom rather than biting.
Yeah.
I think so. That's the thing. They ask you to give them something,
Yes.
and they will give you it back.
Yeah.
And that's where my original interest in these pickups even comes from.
Yeah.
Is why does the guitar I have? Why does it sound so great sat on my sofa?
So let's do well, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick sort of romp through the technical side of the pickup. So output wise, what range do PAFs sit in throughout their
whole range?
Yeah.
they broadly kind of get lower as they go on, which is kind of they start and then they raise and they lower again. So it's not completely linear like any of these things. But if you think you start out, the highest PAFs that I've ever read are in the early 9K range, which is quite unusual. And then obviously if you're checking the inductance or the capacitance on them, you get more of a clear idea of what's going on. But by and large, the highest one I've ever read was in a 59, and it's a double white. There's some colloquial ideas of the double whites being hotter. It's not been my experience, but people do say it. And then basically, so you've got 9 as the absolute peak generally. I have heard of higher, but 9. And you go right down to kind of 6.7, 6.8 as the absolute lowest. And indeed, this neck pickup here is a 6.8K, which is pretty unusual. And because they were just picked off the shelf, as far as I'm concerned anyway, having looked at lots of vintage guitars, the idea that there was any real thought process going on about where they put them or which guitars they put them into strikes me as pretty unlikely.
Yeah. So there was no intentional balance.
No, so this is just pure luck, you know. But some of the guitars, the 9K that I talked about, that's in a 59 335 and it's in the neck position.
Right.
And the bridge pickup is 7.8, I think.
Just the wrong way around.
Yeah. And honestly, that guitar does actually sound really lovely, but it would probably sound even better if you flipped them, to be honest. But there was no thought to that, really.
No.
You know?
And
they weren't expecting us to sit and obsess over it. You know?
Well, quite. And so sometimes when people have come up with, you know, in the past, before talking about pickups was quite as common as it is now, when people have said, oh, this guitar is a spectacular sounding burst or a spectacular sounding 335, it might have been because by happenstance the pickups have ended up being...
I think a lot of the time, and when, you know, as pickup makers, I think a lot of the time we're looking to try and Goldilocks the set. You know, you're trying to like this set where you have, you know, 7.8K bridge and a 6.8K neck. That's not all that's going on. I could ruin that with the magnets. I could ruin that with the offsets of the coils. But it leans you in the right direction. Yeah. And I think an awful lot of those old guitars, either the person who was playing them really knew to lower the neck pickup a lot. And I think that's part of it, to be honest. Some of those, you know, you think about the Kosov guitar, that guitar's got, as far as I can remember, pretty evenly matched pickups. Yeah. And a lot of them did. But the neck pickup was sunk quite low and it was properly balanced. So when people played that guitar, they were like, oh, this is great. Yeah. And it could be as simple as they're not where they should be, you know, because the particular player liked them the other way around, which you know ruins the idea of should right away.
Absolutely. Well, let's we talked about the influence of the winding machine. So during the period that PAFs were produced, how did the machines that were wound on change, and what sort of broad influence did that have on their sound?
You have 3 core winders, but there's also a slug winder as well, just to complicate things, but we'll leave that to one side. But you have the original Geo Stevens KZ winder, which was basically did the P90s and then was kind of it had new tooling on it to accept PAF bobbins as well, and that produces pretty fluffy coils. They're quite low tension, they're center focused, they're quite messy, and you get, obviously in pickups you hear about scatter winding a lot, but you get kind of an unintentionally scattered coil, but in a fairly repeatable way because of the machine. You then go on to the Lisona 101 winder. Basically, iteratively, it just gets better. From the point of view of Gibson, the coils are more consistent, they're easier, they have auto stops on them, that kind of thing. They can be much more repeatable, and the cam that is traversing the wire is filling the bobbin more perfectly. Turns per layer don't really change very much, but the way those turns per layer are implemented on the bobbin is different. And then from there we go in about early 60 to the Meteor winders, although having taken a lot of old pickups apart, I'm not convinced that any of the winders properly went away for any of this time. But the Meteor winder, which again, coils are slightly tighter, coils are slightly more even, coils are slightly more quick and repeatable.
Yeah.
And those then went on to be the winders they continued using when you go to the T-tops and things like that, where further production level ease and convenience changes were made. But that's basically the three main families.
So the pickups in this guitar, which is a Giordano, what model is this?
It's a Giordano Tributo 58.
Great. So you can see where this is headed. It's a 58 sort of style, beautifully aged burster-like, but that's not dignifying it properly because it's a beautiful guitar and very, very light. What's in here?
So that's my 58 archive set, which use a mixed set of coils. So there's some Lissona influence and some KZ influence in them. It's an Alnico 2 bridge and an Alnico 3 neck. It's a sweet sounding, kind of a warts and all path set. Guitarist contributor Bob Wooten, his 58 burst influenced the bridge pickup particularly because I love that pickup. It's wiry, it's airy, it's all these adjectives that we like. It's got the burst on steroids thing, a telly on steroids thing, I should say. It's just a lovely sounding pickup. The neck is slightly lent to be a little bit clearer, but it's still ultimately a plummy, rich, fluty sounding.
Should we give it a little go?
Yeah, go for it.
That's the neck. Let's go to the middle. And let's go to the bridge. So this is, like you say, it's a sort of 58 style guitar with 58 pickups, you know, or your recreation of those. And it's really interesting. I mean, there's plenty of grit and grind there. They're not mega powerful.
No,
you know,
not at all.
They've got a bit.
I should have said actually, it's 8.1K in the bridge and 7.4 in the neck. So they're not massively widely spaced. But the nature of that particularly adds to that middle position sound, which is, a lot of people don't use it that much, but it's part of the joy of a Les Paul setup, really, you know, using those words. But it's, you know, the fact that you can mix the pickups and, you know, back your neck down slightly to get a bit more of a sort of, you know, a squawky kind of lead sound, you know, that sort of thing is really influenced by how the pickups play with each other. You know?
We mentioned magnets earlier on, so how did the style and type of magnet change across the time that PAFs were produced?
Well, we have some original vintage ones that I've brought along with me from my little kind of reference stash. Basically, when I'm having magnets made by a couple of different suppliers, I use vintage magnets that I know well, and I also use formula testing from other ones. But these are a set of 57 magnets, and you can see they're rough cast. They are longer than the ones that I'll show in a second, but they are also uneven. You know, these are out of a set of pickups that were together from the same era, and there's a good probably 2mm difference in the length of them. But they're longer, they're ground on one edge. You often don't see that nowadays. It's not strictly necessary, but it's how they were done back in the day. And these ones are Alnico 2, but you have a spread really. Alnico 2 and Alnico 5 throughout the whole of the PAF history are kind of the core magnets that we most often talk about in here. There's debate over what was being ordered and what was being supplied, because we know that there are Alnico 4 and Alnico 3 magnets, and we know that Gibson used quite a lot of Alnico 3 magnets in P90s before the PAFs. So there was probably quite a lot still sat on shelves. And so we do see a real mixture of all of them. And again, we don't see any particular correlation in era. it's fair to say you see more Alnico 5 magnets as time goes on, and there's lower power Alnico 2, Alnico 3 and Alnico 4 earlier. But it is a real mix. And then by the time we get to mid-1960, these are joined together, but you can see that the length of the magnets has changed a fair amount.
Do you want to hold them up just to sort of show the difference? There's two side by side, so the longer ones are to the left of where the camera's looking, and the shorter ones on the right.
Yeah. So that change does a few things, and basically, as far as we know, and again, to know for sure, you have to scope the pickups, and to be really, really hyper aware, you really kind of have to chemically test the magnets, and that involves destructive testing.
Right.
And nowadays, with the value of these things,
it
doesn't really happen. It does still happen, but very, very irregularly. So we know that most of the short magnets appear to be Alnico 5 with some Alnico 2 mixed in. But like this set, for example, are only an Alnico 5 set.
Yeah.
But the short magnet, you would think it wouldn't make much of a difference, but what you kind of discover with PAFs is that every little thing you change, because these are lo-fi, you know, guitar pickups are a lo-fi audio item, you know, we're not talking about high fidelity gear. No. So every little thing you do, from the carbon content of the screws, which I never believed before I was a pickup maker, that you could audibly hear that, but you can. And so when you take those out and change them, or when you go to the short magnets, a short Alnico 2 and a long Alnico 2, particularly in a neck pickup, are really obviously different.
Right.
The short Alnico 2 magnet, and this is before we go into the reams of where you locate them from in this particular formula of Alnico 2, but it's a drier, more direct sound than the long is. You know, and so you can mix that up when you're doing recreations and decide what works. You know,
and the grades of magnet of Alnico, would they be mingled in pickups sort of haphazardly, or would they tend to be a pair of?
Well, I've come across P90s where you've got obviously 2-bar magnets against a central core. I've come across those where they're mismatched. And not very regularly, and I've worked on quite a lot of old P90s now, and most of the time they gauss the same and they appear to behave the same. But I have come across them where they're mismatched.
But I should have been
in PAFs. We're going back to PAFs.
In sort of sets that were put on guitars.
I don't think there was any consistency at all. There is some talk of once you reach a certain point that they might have been at very least sorting the pickups between Alnico 5 and Alnico 2, basically the more powerful Alnico and putting them in based on that. There is some talk of that. I think you'd have to go through a lot of vintage instruments to be sure, and very few of us are lucky enough to do that. You know?
That's great. Well, let's sort of talk about. I touched on it earlier. You mentioned about the sort of output starting high and then going down a bit, and then it's a kind of like that sort of thing.
A little bit, and it's pretty inconsistent, but
we've spoken about. I remember trying a 61 335 that had really quite pokey pickups in it. They sounded glorious, and we've spoken about how right at the end of the PAF sort of era there was maybe an up tilt in.
I think it's less output and it's more the magnet. It's more that short Alnico 5 being really quite direct. And so even though the pickup can still be sitting at, say 7.8 to 8K, people say, oh, this is a high output pickup. But in actual fact, what you're hearing is the real push that magnet has and the way that it grabs certain frequencies. And I think particularly the upper mid-range makes the guitar feel really forward, and particularly when you're hitting big chords or whatever else, it feels really alive and really gutsy. But in actual fact, the pickup is still pretty weak by modern standards.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because it's an interesting subject. We tend to, when people talk about pickups, a lot of people, including myself for many, many years, would just look at the DC resistance as that broad rule of thumb. But of course, like all these things, it's a sort of web of interacting influences. So how does the magnet strength interact with the resistance?
So, I mean, really, you're not talking about the resistance at that point. You're into capacitance and inductance, and the higher the inductance the pickup is, the more push it has. Effectively, the more grunt you will hear as a player, and you could argue the less detailed and responsive the high end will be.
Yeah.
The higher the capacitance, the darker the pickup will be.
Yeah.
It's kind of as simple as that, really.
Yeah.
And the lower it is, the more sparkle you'll get out of the
Yeah.
pickup. The combination of those, the resistance, but also when you're dealing with PAFs, and this is why they are kind of, I suppose, still an area of the market that is heavily explored, but people are still constantly trying to get a handle on, is because there's more going on in them than a P90, which is still the best pickup ever. It is, okay, it just is. It's noisy, but it's the best pickup ever. The Fender stuff, you know, the Tele pickups, you know, all of that stuff, the Mustang pickups, everything, those are all basically wire wrapped around flat work with some slug magnets in them. And that means any tiny thing you do to them, you hear. But with these, there's just so many more moving parts. You know, not moving, but you know, there's lots of different little things that are going on, lots of nuances that you need to try and get right. And lots of things which there was never any detailed documentation for any of this stuff. So, you know, everyone's kind of, you know, has had to do the legwork to work out why the old ones sound the way they do. And more than anything else, they let a lot of guitar through because they're unpotted. All of them. There isn't a potted PAF or P90, a humbucker or P90 from Gibson until really we get into the late 60s, early 70s. They're all unpotted, you know, and that means, you know, you sit next to a loud amp and rap on the back of your guitar, you'll hear it. You know, you hold the strings, so that's not doing it, and the guitar is getting to the amp. You know, that's before we get into arguments about various things. But so you are getting to the amp as well. So all the little nuances that you're putting in, they're getting through. And I think that's kind of maybe the biggest key to what makes them really special in many ways.
I mean, we mentioned P90s. I mean, some people would say, well, the the PAF, I don't know what your view is on this, but the PAF was voiced to sound like a P90 except without the hum. Do you think that holds water or not?
Yeah, I mean, Seth Lover's brief was definitely to go away and stop them being so noisy, you know, in the nicest possible way. That was probably the directive from Ted McCarty, was fix that. I would say the best PAFs do echo the kind of faux acoustic qualities of a great P90. But not that many of them do. And as we're getting sort of, you know, late 59, 60, they start to get less like that. Like those, that wiriness in that bridge pickup, that acoustic-y nature, that you'll hear in a lot of older P90s. But the P90s were also changing. You know, they were getting the short magnets and they were getting more brash sounding. Like, you know, the early SG Juniors and that kind of thing, they sound fantastic, but they don't sound like a 55 Junior at all. You know, and that's not just the construction, it's also the fact the pickup has got the short magnets in, it's got a different coil style, and they're just that much more in the middle. Boom,
if there's one thing you wished people understood about the interaction between winding style, magnet type, and output, what would it be?
That's a question. I wish more than anything else, really. I mean, it's a lucky world to be in, because the guitar world is in a world where everything is, you know, more mechanized, more consistent. You know, we are still sat around prizing things that they worked, but they weren't perfect, you know, and that's what's musical about them. That's what makes them artistic. That's what makes them interesting. And it's why we all, you know, have our nerdy moments alongside playing. And I think understanding the fact that your guitar is playing a really, really key role, and all of the little things in the pickup, as much as anything else, knowing the kind of core biases of your guitar. Like this guitar's got a fairly plummy low end and it's got a certain readiness in the high end. It's very lovely and rich in the mid-range. So because I know those things about the guitar, I can go and look at a set of pickups and go, from the spec, what's it likely to do with that guitar? And it won't always be right, but fairly consistently it will be. And that's, I think, the thing to try and get hold of, is have a guitar you like first. Doesn't matter how expensive it is, you know, it can be a Squier, it can be a custom shop, doesn't matter. But have a guitar that you really like. And then if you're buying pickups for it, try to speak to whoever you're working with and ask them what they recommend for that guitar. And hopefully they'll talk to you about what's good about your one, you know.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, and with some imaginary scenarios.
Okay, go for it.
So I was lucky enough to play Bernie Marsden's Beast, you know, a really hot very famously
Yes.
kind of quite aggressive sounding Les Paul. If, let's say, I had an R9, somewhat similar to Bernie's, obviously a modern reissue, and I wanted to recreate that sort of sound quite on the hotter, more aggressive side of the PAF legacy, what would you do?
If you had a guitar which was quite forceful in the mid-range, so you were sat on the couch with it and it was quite honky and mid-rangey, and you wanted it to sound like Bernie's guitar wound up, I would probably use Alnico 5 magnets because I'd want to just restrain the mid-range of the guitar just a little bit. You're not really restraining anything, you're pushing the low end and the high end. It's an attenuative process, really. So you're pushing the low and the high end and making the mids appear to come back. I mean, make the guitar sound more open. Those big chords, those aggressive lead lines will just have a bit more high-end cut and be a bit more forceful. That would be the first thing. But if the guitar itself has quite a prickly high end, then I'm probably going to go for a slightly hotter wind just to pull that high end just into focus a little bit and make it a little bit less edgy. That's how I'd approach it, really. You're thinking about what the different elements of the pickup will do to the frequency response of that guitar. And that's before we then talk about their rig and it all gets even more complicated.
And let's take the opposite. Let's suppose I'm a person who plays in that sort of jazz blues arena that someone like Robin Ford is well known for playing in. And I played, I don't know, an ES 175 or something like that, and I wanted some PAFs that were a little bit more civilized, less likely to cause feedback, and have a warm sort of blue note kind of sound. What would you go with
if the guitar's honky, I would go with an Alnico 4 magnet in the bridge pickup. It's got some of the elements of an Alnico 5, but it's not as extreme in any area. If the guitar's not honky, I'd go with an Alnico 2 bridge for sure, because you're going to get, like you said, that blue note thing. You're going to get that extra bloom in the mids. It's just going to be a sweeter sounding guitar. And then the neck pickup, you balance with that. Probably an Alnico 3 neck pickup. I use Alnico 3 neck pickups quite a lot. I like its clarity and its sweetness and its musicality. It'll kind of track whatever you're doing really, really nicely. That would probably be the mixture I would use in a guitar like that.
So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, PAFs, bursts weren't the only guitars that PAFs appeared in, as we alluded to there with the 175s and things like that. If you were winding a set of PAF style pickups for an SG, for example, would your approach differ?
The sets that I'd suggest to the owner, there are certain pickups which, because of mainly it's the construction of the SG. Most people have got the experience of picking up a Les Paul and then picking up an SG, and the SG just feeling quicker, tighter, more direct, and a bit more aggressive. And you can decide whether you want to lean into that or not. You can try and lean that back a little bit. Excuse me. Say you're a player, I don't know, like Chris Buck. He's got a really nice SG with a set of Alnico 3 pickups in it that I did for him, which makes the guitar way more like him. More ultra dynamic, more sweet and lyrical. Whereas if we stuck a really fruity set of Alnico 5 or even Alnico 4 pickups in it, we could lean into the Angus Young balls to the wall sound. So again, we go back to the thinking about the guitar, really. Whether it's the individual guitar or the style of guitar, we go back to what will work with that guitar for what that person wants it to do. Because the truth is that I might want this guitar to do what it does, but someone else that gets it might stick a set of humbucker size P90s in it or whatever else. You need to be thinking about what you as a player want that thing to do.
Well, let's take a third sort of case study. Let's suppose it's me. I really like a hottish bridge pickup when we're doing sort of patent applied full style pickups. A bit more on the swampy side, so not super bright, a bit more sort of grindy and sort of swampy. And on the neck, what I don't like is in humbuckers is that sort of sine wavy, sort of too fluty thing. I want it to be leaning more towards that single coil-esque style of things.
There's a couple of ways you can go about it. I mean, the bridge pickup, we know where we'd be. We'd be with a late 60s PAF to transitionary patent number spec that had a kind of output that worked for you with that. The neck pickup's more complicated because, and it always is. The truth is, it's easier to make a bridge PAF sound good than it is a neck. Most of the originals are relatively dark. by a lot of player standards, if you've spent your life with relatively modern single coils or relatively modern humbuckers even, the low end in a PAF is quite wallowy, and it needs to be contained by your pick attack, where you pick the string. You know, if you go over to the neck pickup on this guitar, you know, I'm not gonna, because I'm gonna get a lot of flub out of it. You know, you need to work the pickup, because they are quite. They have a tendency to be quite dark. And the truth is, I mean, this is a 6.8K. For all the world's generalised idea, this should be a fairly bright PAF. There are reasons why it's not internally, which I won't waffle on about too much because I make a replica of it. But it still has that plummy low end. So removing that is... if you want it to still be a PAF, is not really possible. No. You know, you can make it more or less. And certainly, I mean, with this guitar, this is 50s wired, which we can talk about as well. But if you back this guitar slightly and back the tone slightly, you know, it will clear up, and without a treble bleed. Which is one way you can also try and get PAF style pickups to be brighter as you back them off. So to be honest with you, if you were talking to me about that, I'd probably talk about what your wiring was in the guitar as well as the pickup. And then I would probably do quite a big coil offset. It can make a PAF quite dark, but it also makes it slightly more single coil sounding.
So for the uninitiated, what is a coil offset?
So if you have the two coils sat inside the pickup, basically it's the amount of wire on one to the other. It varies. Obviously, in the factory, they were aiming to get as close as possible. The pickup actually gets less humbucking. Technically speaking, they're never truly humbucking anyway. But basically the more offset you have between how much wind there is on each coil, the less efficiently it bucks the hum. But the truth is, I mean, this has got quite a wide offset on it, and it's still bucking the hum. You know, it doesn't make the pickup completely inefficient. But you will get the theory. I think a lot of the times people think, oh, a big offset's going to make the pickup brighter. It doesn't really, but it does make it feel more single coil. It does make the top end fluty, but like you say, not that kind of really, in some ways, kind of 70s Les Paul, kind of, you know, very even sounding. It takes that away.
Dynamic range. I guess that's what I was saying, was that, you know, within the sort of operating parameters, if you like, of a PAF or a patent applied for pickup, I should say, then more on that sort of dynamic side than on the that's what I would like on the neck.
I mean, and for me, if it was dynamics more than anything else, I actually would go in the opposite direction and not do a big offset. I'd probably have the coils quite close together, and I would go towards the KZ wind, where you do have quite a lot of low end in those pickups, but the whole of the rest of the spectrum tends to be a bit wirier, and it gives the whole pickup a bit more responsiveness under the fingers. That's kind of my favourite kind of style of neck PAF. And it's just more controllable. You know, while there still is that low end, if you want it, you can tweak it and you can get the thing just to sound a little bit more clear and add that, like you say, that sense of frequency range, which in truth, there isn't a huge frequency range, but it's, you know, we're not into, you know, mad EMG style stuff, which has got really broad. It's still quite direct and lo-fi, but yeah, you have more on offer.
So we've got, let's go to the neck pickup on here. It's kind of perfect for me, actually.
Well, that makes perfect sense, because that pickup is there's not a big offset in it at all. It's an Alnico 3 magnet, so you've got low power magnet, not very much offset. It's a mid-level output at 7.4, but with that guitar and with your playing style where you're able to not hit the strings too hard, it just allows it to breathe.
So by coincidence, I've actually picked
kind of
up
got the right one.
It's funny, when I picked this up and I said immediately felt home on this guitar. There is reason for that.
Yeah, you did. And it works very well. I mean, you're into a Vox at the moment, and it works very well in that kind of world, you know, and that brings you on to how the synergy is between the guitar you're using and the amp.
Well, let's talk a little. We've mentioned the guitars. Let's talk about the amps we're going through here. I'm going through one of the latest series of hand-wired Vox AC15s that just came out recently. Tell us about this amp.
So this is Martin Kidd's latest victory, the MKX.
Yeah.
It's basically a baby version of the big MK Overdrive they released at last year's NAMM.
Yeah, and they were
so
really
2025.
premium amps.
Yeah, lots of bells and whistles, lots of customizability and stuff. So this is the lunchbox version, really. And as a guy that comes from the old Cornford world, which are all Martin's designs, this feels very at home. I used the Cornford Hellcat for years. And it's kind of like Martin has crushed an MK50 Mark II into, this ridiculous little package, still with the L34. So it's a great little amp. I mean, it's new to me, and it's I'm impressed.
Oh, nice. So, since we were talking about paint applied for pickups, Stuart's been kind enough to give us a sneak peek at his latest set. So, what are these?
So these are new to the range. This particular set was made for you to try in one of your own guitars. There's a couple little concessions to modernity in them. But they're called the KZ57 SB PAF. I call everything's SB PAF. But these are KZ57. So I have a 57 set, which is more of an idealised kind of set. It's all still very traditional and very much a replica. But there's some tweaks and, unique things in it. These are based around the KZ wind that we were talking about earlier. So the very early centre-focused, messy, quote-unquote, wound coils. And that's really the core difference in this set. And on top of that, you've also got all the normal stuff that's in my pickups, like the rough cast magnets that we have done here or in the US, depending on the formula that we're looking for. Then you've got the reshaped covers in-house. So we get these covers, they're then reshaped to follow one of the covers, which is a 58 cover off of this. There's a form made of that, and we reshape them into those covers, so you get a really nice correct shape. And then internally, everything's just correct. So butyrate bobbins, the turns per layer, everything is replicated. And then the magnet in the bridge pickup on this set is unoriented Alnico 5. Without getting into the weeds on that, basically it's how the magnet is cast, whether or not it's cast in a magnetic field or not. Alnico 2 is normally not oriented, but Alnico 5 normally is. When you have an unorientated Alnico 5, it brings some of the character of an Alnico 2, or what we hear as an Alnico 2, into an Alnico 5. So it's a bit more mid-range without that kind of pushed bottom and top that makes the mid-range feel recessed. So it's a bit more of that kind of character. And then it's an Alnico 2 pickup for the neck. But it's American Alnico 2 rather than my normal UK made Alnico 2. It's a bit drier, bit like the guitar you were playing earlier that you really liked. There'll be some elements of that within that pickup. And then hand-aged, each cover's done by me. And then this set has got full conductor wiring and short leg, because it's going into a PRS initially, and then you can do whatever you want with it from then. But they're designed to be a really nicely balanced, very classically voiced set of pickups, which has that nasal mid-range without it being too broad in the bridge, and a really clear for a PAF, but still very much a classic, slightly fluty top end, sweet, airy kind of mid-range in the neck one.
And output-wise, how do these compare?
So this particular set is 8.1 in the bridge and 7.3 in the neck, which you'll see that across my range of pickups, there's quite a lot of things which look like they converge. And you will see questions like, this is the same magnet and almost the same output in the 59 neck and the 58 neck. And the truth is they're vastly different pickups, but that's because the offset of the coils, what we were discussing earlier, is different, and the style of the wind will be different as well. So, and maybe the source of the magnet will also be different, even if it's the same Alnico type. And so, it's about trying to get that all lined up for a set that's a bit Goldilocks, this particular set.
Well, wonderful. So looking forward to giving those a whirl in the PRS-CE bolt-on neck guitar I use with humbuckers. It'd be fascinating to see how everything we've been talking about sort of plays out in that. Before we sort of wind things up, I know that this exact shape, or the authentic shape of patent applied for pickups, it has been sort of debated thing, hasn't it? Because initially people thought that the reissues that were made weren't kind of rounded off enough, and then what sort of pendulum swung there?
Yeah, so many of the modern covers have kind of almost like little domes in the corners, and we kind of see that when they're sat in the pickup ring as them being kind of more rounded. They're actually quite straight, but those little domed edges kind of throw the eye if you're used to looking at old stuff. And then you get kind of an overreaction to that, so then we get ones that are really square. And some of the very early PAF covers, when the die that they're stamped with was
crisp,
super fresh, and when they were doing the steel ones, they are really quite
mega square,
but they very quickly soften. And because PAF covers were ground and polished before they were plated by hand on a small die, so that every single cover is actually different anyway. Never mind the stamp, it's actually how much it was ground. You get ones where the hole wanders, and that's because it's been lent on too much against the grinder, and so they're never the same, and the top plate thickness is never the same as the sides. And so a lot of the time, you'll get like replica covers or whatever else, and they'll say they're the correct gauge, and they are the correct gauge of metal, but they've not been ground, so the top plate is then too thick. So with covers like this, we're going for I'm not worried about the side thickness very much. I'm worried about the bit that's actually looking at the string, and I want that to be the correct thickness, within the margins of the error of the guy grinding them. So that, and then the shape, we have this slight bow to the edges, which gives you that TV quality. Not TVs nowadays, but TVs
Old
back
school,
in the day. And then quite straight edges in general. And for them to look, to be honest, a little bit more like hands have been involved with them.
For sure.
Because they were, and that's what you're going for.
Well, it's a lovely testament to your work and your sort of deep research in this area. And hopefully be back in the guitarist studio at some point in the future to show everybody how this sounds as well. Okay, well, I think that's we've had a pretty good deep dive into the patent applied for style pickup and all of the variations of the originals and how you recreate them today. So if you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe. And if you've got any comments on this style of pickup or the originals, please drop them under the video, and we'll enjoy reading those. But I mean, do you think the Mystique is justified? Do you think there's too much snake oil in the marketing of pickups that are like this? What do you think about all of the things we've discussed? Do let us know, and we'll look forward to reading those after the videos come out. So thanks very much for watching, and thanks a big thank you to Stuart Robson of Sunbear Pickups.
Pleasure to be. Thank you.